This is the Living in Clarity podcast. My name is Brandon Fisher. This is Coach Ratner, and we've got a very special guest today.
I know, I'm so excited. Rabbi Ken Spiro, historian, author, passionate tour guide here in Israel. I mean, I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. He has 3 books he's come out with: WorldPerfect, Crash Course in Jewish History, and Destiny. You know, I read Crash Course in Jewish History twice. It's so good. It's like the clarity of life, you know. So, Ken, you know, we're so happy to have you, and tell us about, like, how'd you get involved and how'd you get here to Israel in the first place?
That in and of itself is a great story. I was raised in a non-observant family. You know, my kids are all born in Israel, speak Hebrew as their first language, raised observant. It's pretty cool. Have, you know, first people in 2,000 years who can say that. My son, my oldest son, years ago, he you know, I used to say I came from a non-religious home. He goes, "Dad, what does that mean?" I told him on Passover we used to have ham and cheese on matzah. And he laughed and he said, "Dad, why'd you bother with the matzah?" I said, it was Passover. We couldn't have bread.
Yeah. So is that a true story?
True story.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
Real life is always better than fiction. So I went to public school.
Where is this?
I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in New Rochelle, New York. Went to New Rochelle High School. Went to Vassar College undergrad. I actually studied Russian language and literature was my major, and I studied Japanese also. I wanted to do international business, so I thought those would be the hot languages to know. Today it would definitely be Spanish and Mandarin. But when I got out of college, I'd studied 3 years in high school and 4 years in college. I could read Tolstoy's War and Peace in Russian, but I couldn't ask for directions on a street. Because if you actually want to speak a language, what do you got to do?
You have to go there.
You got to live there. I always say, want to learn Spanish? You got to live in Florida or Texas. So I said, before I go off to grad school, I took a year off. I wanted to break anyway. I said, I'm going to go to Russia as a graduate student for 6 months. And then because I had another half a year to kill, I was going to go to Israel because when I was in college, I didn't have birthright yet. So I signed up for Kibbutz Ulpan. I was going to pick grapefruits with Danish volunteers, work on my suntan, learn a little Hebrew. So when I went off to Russia, which was ages ago, it was the Soviet Union. When it was the Soviet Union, it was, you know, illegal for a Jew to even own a book in Hebrew. You'd get arrested for trying to basically study or practice anything. You know, if you were doing it as a young person, your father would lose his job. It was unbelievable. You know, and I had to go through after-school Hebrew school, which in my opinion was one of the most destructive ideas ever thought up in Jewish history.
Jew jail, they call it.
Yeah, Jew jail. I figured out by 3rd grade that no one ever didn't get into Harvard because they failed out of after-school Hebrew. But I used to do anything I could to get thrown out of it.
Sure,
and I
of course.
ended up going to Russia for 6 months, and I'm cutting most of my graduate classes because I wasn't really interested. I just wanted the immersion and the speaking. But I'm hanging out with dozens of young Russian Jews who were like risking it all to learn Hebrew, to learn Judaism, to keep Shabbat. Like the first Shabbat I ever went to was a secret Shabbat where the guy's parents were hiding in the bedroom with the door locked because it was illegal to have a Friday night dinner. And they didn't have any kosher food. So what do they? No kosher wine, no meat. So they had cabbage and potatoes, and they made the kiddush on a cup of water, like with 6 raisins floating in it.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And they all spoke Hebrew, and they all knew about Judaism. And here I remember sitting. I have such a vivid memory of sitting there going, "Whoa! I come from America, the land of religious freedom. I don't know anything about Judaism, even though I went through years of boring after-school Hebrew school, and these guys are like risking their lives for that. There's got to be something more meaningful here." And by the way, I left out a little caveat there that my parents, in a desperate effort to get me to marry someone Jewish, which was the big thing in my generation.
Yes.
You got to marry Jewish. We're going to sit Shiva. I thought sitting Shiva was like an Indian chief or something. They actually sent me. They actually bribed me to go out and to Dennis Prager. This is before all the story I got to. This was the prologue to all of this. They bribed me to go spend a month in Simi Valley, California, with Dennis Prager and Joseph Telushkin. This was between my junior and senior year at Vassar, and I didn't. Prager himself was like a traditional guy, but not orthodox. But he was the first person I ever met who could say anything intelligent about Judaism. So it didn't make me observant, but at least got me thinking. So when I went off to Russia and had that experience, it was like, you know, we say in Hebrew, the mak of a patish. It was like the final hammer blow.
Mm-hmm. Did he have a school? What did he have?
They ran a program called, it was at the BCI, it was Brandeis Camp Institute. It was founded by, it's the largest Jewish-owned real estate in the world. Outside the state of Israel in Simi Valley, California, founded by Shlomo Bardin and Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. Mm-hmm. And it has like a a synagogue there, an adult education center, a day camp there, a summer camp, and it had these 1-month experiences for young single Jews between the ages of like 18 and 26.
Is that on today?
I don't know. I think it's still going on.
I've never heard of it.
They had 2 Aliot in the summer of a month each. And you just studied in the morning. You had classes, various speakers from all the different Jewish backgrounds, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, and you did. It was like living on a kibbutz, right?
Right.
I mean, it looked like Israel. When I got to Israel, I said, "Wow, it looks like California." So that was like the pre-experience that I had. So when I got to Russia, I was already thinking, there's something more to this Judaism. And then when I really immersed myself in these people who are risking their lives to be Jewish, I decided when I got back, my roommate from college had been to Torah for a few weeks between his junior and senior year, and he was at Cornell now in graduate school getting his MB, JD, his business and law degrees, and he decided, I want to go back and learn. So we met back in the States. And we decided.
From Russia. You went to Russia.
Well, I came back first to the States after, in January, and then before I was going to go to Israel, we met and we decided let's both go to yeshiva. And he said, let's come to this place, Torah.
What year was this?
Well, that's the funny part. So I said I'll go for 3 months.
Right.
So I always say I stayed a little longer. Yeah. I stayed for now 8 months and 40 years.
Right.
That was. I arrived in Israel in February of 1982.
Wow.
And I never planned to stay, but like I say, man proposes, God laughs.
Yeah.
I stayed. I became observant and stayed on. My younger brother was at Cornell. He stayed. He became a rabbi. Also, my sister then came a year later. She stayed. My older brother came and visited. He wanted to come back, but he never made it back. And my parents, who never became observant, but my mother's favorite line is, "We're counting on you kids to get us into heaven." My parents, they
live here.
They koshered their home, and 9 years ago they came. My mother was in her mid-70s. My dad was in his, early 80s. They made Aliyah. Now my father, he's living be well, is 92, and my mom's 89. Yeah, so they moved here. Yeah, so it's quite a story. Never would have dreamed any of this, but
How did you get involved in the community in Russia? First of all, how do you find the community in the Soviet Union?
That's a great story.
Why?
That's a great story. I used to do volunteer work for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, this guy Gene Sosin, and I used to do surveys it was the University of Illinois, did all the immigrant surveys. I used to volunteer to go into South Brooklyn because I knew some Russian and do these little surveys for them. And when I went to Russia, Gene Sosin told me there's going to be an International Association of Jewish Book Publishers, because it's like Qatar now with the World Cup. They don't like Israel, but you can't host an international event if you ban countries from doing it.
Sure.
So they have to invite Israel in. So the same thing, they had to invite.
Israel's flying to Qatar.
Yeah. So same thing in Russia.
But they don't allow kosher food.
Right, because it was an international book fair. They had to allow the New York Association of Jewish Book Publishers, and they had to allow Israel to have an exhibit.
Right.
And it was an amazing experience because imagine I'd been 7 years studying Russian, and I get to Russia, and it was like late August, and the weather was nice, and I'm like flying high. I'm like on a dream. I'm actually here, and it's amazing, and all, I'm getting my Russian got really good pretty fast too. And then I go to this book fair, and we wait in line for like an hour to get in, and then the guard at the front says, "Foreigners don't wait, you just go in." And then I go into the New York Association of Jewish Book Publishers exhibit, and you couldn't sell anything. Everything's on display, like books everywhere, but you're not allowed to sell because it wasn't for sale. And they didn't want anyone getting Jewish books, God forbid.
But the whole book fair was like that.
I don't know. I never checked, but I know nothing was for sale, just on display.
And by this one, you had not written a book yet.
This is way before. No, I wasn't observant. Nothing. Yeah. So and he told me, Gene Sosin, who was the director, who's no longer with us. He told me to go meet this guy David Harris. So I think is the same David Harris as the head of the American Jewish Congress today. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's the same guy. He said he's there. So I remember you could spot the Americans in communism. All the Russians had crappy clothes, ugly glasses, ugly shoes. So I see this tall, very American-looking guy, and I walk up to him and I say, "You must be David Harris." And he says, "Yes, I am." I go, "Gene Sosin says hello," and he shakes my hand. He goes, "My name is," he goes, "Don't say it." I said, "What?" He said, "Don't say your name here." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "If they get your name, you could be in trouble." And I went from like, "I'm in Russia," to "This is hell. Get me out."
Right.
Wow.
It was like suddenly, 1984. And then I noticed like on the ceiling, there's a big like events hall, there's like guys with cameras photographing everyone, and there's KGB agents standing on all the sides of the room and everything. And I said, can I do anything for you? He goes, yeah, let them steal all the books. And for the next 6 months I was in Russia, everywhere I went, I saw books that were from the New York, because people had them. He'd let them steal them because they wanted to have, they were so desperate. Because the other lesson I learned is if you want to get a Jew to do something, just tell them they can't.
Right.
And they'll go do it. If Congress would ban Hebrew school, every Jew would run up and start learning Hebrew school. Right. So, and then I went, but how did I, to answer your question, how did I meet people actually? Then we went to the Israel exhibit, and there was a huge room, and I remember there's no one in it. It was empty. People were like too afraid to walk in, and all around were KGB agents, like lining the walls. And there was 3 guys who looked really Jewish. When I say look Jewish, they look Jewish, and Russians have an incredible sense for spotting Jews. Right. They can really tell. And they also had beards, which no one in Russia had, and they were wearing caps, not kippot. Right. And my roommate from in my dormitory in Moscow was this guy Jim Cohen from Vermont, who lived in a non-Jewish area. So his parents got him a Hebrew teacher. He spoke Hebrew. He was also a great entertainer. He was really tall, thin, had his huge smile, and knew like 200 Israeli and Hebrew songs. So he walks up to them and starts speaking to the 3 guys in Hebrew. I didn't know any Hebrew. I learned enough Hebrew from my bar mitzvah to like read a little bit, but I had no idea what I was saying. And the KGB guys walk right up and stand next to us. Like 3 of them just leaning in to listen. They're not being like secret about it. And they walk away because they didn't know Hebrew. Yeah. So this guy invited us to his parents' house for the Shabbat dinner that I was telling you about. Okay. So I went and got like all the Jewish students we could find. We got like 7 or 8 of us. I got yeast. Russians couldn't get yeast because they're all alcoholics. Right. And they were like, yeast was a hard thing to get. And I made him a challah. They got really excited. I baked them a challah. Wow. And we went to their house.
Was that illegal?
I mean, it wasn't legal to bake a challah, but you know, I brought it. They never had challah because they couldn't bake bread because they couldn't get yeast. And then we just had experience after experience like that. It was just sneaking out of Moscow, which was illegal to go to most of Russia, to go to a secret sukkah built in the woods. And I met all these interesting people who are today very famous refuseniks that, Yuri Edelstein I met in Russia. I remember when he came here, and now he's in the Knesset, people like that. Sharansky was in jail at the time. But it was just an incredible experience. It was just, I really should have written a book about it.
You still can.
I know, but I forgot most of it. I saved my letters. I should have published the letters I wrote to my parents. But it really made me appreciate, first of all, the value of freedom. Yeah. Something that Americans are so spoiled. Right. They just don't realize how lucky they are.
Can we talk about that for a second?
And also the value of Judaism. That there's got to be something there. People are willing to, like risk their freedom and even their life to be connected Jewishly. There's definitely got to be something there.
So let's talk about both of those points. What is the value of freedom, and how is it being portrayed in the world today?
Yeah, well, freedom is, from my perspective as a historian and a rabbi, because I wear 2 hats, is freedom is, and it's funny, I had this discussion in Russia. I remember sitting it might have been with Yosef Bigun even, who's now a very famous refusenik. I remember I snuck outside Moscow, and we're sitting in a sukkah. The first time I'd ever been to a sukkah in my life. Is freezing to death outside in the woods in the secret sukkah. And he starts saying to me, he says, like, you Americans think freedom is what ice cream you choose. He's going on about what freedom is really about. It's about the decision to be able to control your life and have autonomy over yourself and do what you want to do. And he says, you don't have any appreciation. He was basically telling me off about how spoiled I was. Right. But from a Jewish perspective, the most godlike thing we have is our ability to choose. And choices are what we're judged ultimately. I always say, we Jews don't believe in like a devil with a pitchfork in hell. I always say the ultimate hell is, you see 2 movies, the movie of, Ken Spiro, who he was, and then the movie of Ken Spiro, who he could be. And since you're the coach, you know that a good coach doesn't say I want 100% results. He says I want 100% effort. Yes. So we are the sum total of the choices we make. And that is the free will we use to decide what we're going to be and what we're going to do with our abilities, our unique abilities in this world. Yeah. So, and I think it's very undervalued, and it's the thing most at threat in this world.
Do you think that the freedom that we have in America is going to last forever, or do you think it's going to be like the way of Rome? When Rome fell, no one thought that Rome was going to fall, right? And it fell for what reason?
Well, it fell for many reasons. First of all, rotted from within. Decadence. Right. Decadence is the great downfall of. But people are willing. What we do see is, the Romans had bread and circus. Give people, entertain them, like smartphone and junk food. Yeah. Entertain them and feed them. Right. Like the Chinese are smart. unlike the Russians, where you didn't have any stuff and they had no freedom. People will sacrifice their freedom if they have stuff.
Right.
If I can work hard and be rewarded for my work, I don't really care how much freedom I have to really express myself. So the Chinese got a very dangerous working model. Whereas when totalitarian regimes where you have tremendous oppression and no availability of no freedom and no consumer goods, that's rife for not a good for long-term survival.
Right now. They're going through.
It's not. So we see it's not a new thing in history, but we see if you look in the world today, under the guise of moderating correct speech and stuff, they're definitely. The edges of freedom and free speech are being nibbled away at in a way we've never seen before. In a place like America, I see it's very, very, very scary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Rome fell, I thought, really because people were stopped willing to fight for their country. Yeah. There's so much morality.
They weren't willing to. They just wanted to be comfortable.
Right.
The birth rates collapsed, just like Western world today, where the average age in Japan is 48. The average age in Italy is 45. You walk around the streets of Jerusalem, and Jaffa Road, which is the second busiest street in Israel, is just the average age on the street is probably 20.
Right.
And the average age in Israel is 29. It's the lowest average age of the OECD.
Right.
Because this is a healthy society that values children. When people start looking at children as a burden that take away from my pleasure and I have to spend money on them as opposed to spending money on myself, and they're not willing to fight for their country, Rome built the greatest empire in the world because Roman citizens fought and died in a very professional, excellent army. By the end, they were just letting everyone in and mercenaries. You can't defend a country with mercenaries.
No, not willing to die.
Not going to work.
Yeah. So what do you think about all the anti-Semitism that's going on today? I read a stat this year that in America, up until September, 65% of hate crimes have been against the Jews, whereas we're only 2% of the American population.
Yes, well, it's religious hate crime.
Right.
Religious hate crime for sure. Jews are. I always use the example. I just saw another article. I didn't. Someone showed it to me. I don't remember what it was about. How a very significant percent of employers. It's like 25+% don't want to hire Jews.
Right.
Because they're just hard to deal with.
Right.
That kind of thing. So you see, but it's like the famous story of the frog in the water that where they turn the heat up.
The frog goes in the cold water.
And the frog in the cold water, but the heat's on, and before he knows, the frog's boiled to death. And if you stand back, when I grew up in America, I'm talking about, I was a little kid in the 60s, you didn't have guards outside synagogues. The only police you ever saw was in Temple Israel in the Rochelle. The only time everyone showed up was Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur in their cars, and the police had to be there. They had to open up 2 huge parking lots, and the police had to direct traffic.
Right.
It was the only cop you ever saw.
Right.
You didn't need security. You didn't have that stuff. You didn't have people being attacked in restaurants in Los Angeles sitting out in the streets. So we've gotten used to it, and shootings and things like that. We've gotten used to it, and the anti-Semitism is alive and well and at levels that we haven't seen since the Holocaust. If you look at the ADL statistics, it's there, and it's scary how many people harbor very negative attitudes towards Jews.
Right.
So it's on the rise, even.
100%. There's no question.
Does it come out because of what like Kanye West says, or what Kyrie Irving, or I know it's all there anyway. But do they make it when they spout this kind of thing? Does it make it easier for other people to come out and say it?
Sure. When you start legitimatizing it, and you see, like you mentioned to me, you did, and I did a short video piece for English. Online TV station, JTV. And I did like an 8-minute thing on anti-Semitism, and the danger is the anonymity of the internet now.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. See, now things you never dare to say in public are out, and I was horrified. I said better than what I said was the comments after, because it was literally, I was scrolling down 400 or 500 rabidly anti-Semitic comments, basically confirming exactly what I was saying in the class.
Right.
And then like one person pipes in, well, Jews aren't so bad. Then everyone jumps on them.
I know.
So I didn't, when I was on campus, when I was in college, we had South Africa to pick on. There was still apartheid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that's out of the way, so intersectionality makes Israel the focus. And that's very scary because I know, I didn't experience it personally, but I hear stories from, kids on college campuses.
Today.
Forget being pro-Israel. I see that I used to speak on college campuses. Now they don't even let you on and speak. But you can't even openly profess, your Judaism. You wear like a Magen David or something like that, because the intersectionality also merges Jews and Israel together. It takes only a few minutes. You scratch below the surface of the Israel bashing person, and usually they start screaming anti-Semitic things.
Right.
And they use Jew and Israeli interchangeably. Like you walk in the shuk out over here. I know enough Arabic to know. I know what they're talking about. They don't say Israeli, or they say Yehud. They're always saying Yehud. They're always referring to us as Jew. So they look at us as a Jew. They don't look at us as an Israeli, which means that the same Jew Jew from New York, he's also a Jew.
Yeah.
But you see it all the time.
I want to read you some comments that we received from some of our podcasts. I want you to comment on them. Jews are duped that makes them think they are chosen, and the rest are goyim slaves. So they're saying that basically we think that people are slaves.
Yeah, we have a common motif you find.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I have a friend who went to visit the Rome, the Roman Coliseum, and they posted something on Facebook like how romantic. I'm like, that's not so romantic. How many Jews built the Roman Coliseum? It was like 100,000 Jewish slaves built the Coliseum.
Yeah, it was paid for by the money from Jerusalem because it looted from Jerusalem.
How about this one? Comparing the Nazis and what the Jews are doing to the Palestinians is not anti-Semitic. So many times they're calling us Nazis.
Yeah.
I can't even fathom the comparison.
But also, there's a great line that it says Germany's never forgiven the Jewish people for the Holocaust. It's a little harsh because a lot of Germans are very good about it. And Germany at least owned it for the horribleness of what they did. But I always say, especially when I'm in Yad Vashem guiding, because I'm also a tour guide, I always end, with if there's any silver lining in the Holocaust, it's the Jewish state. And it sounds cynical, but I believe it's true. The world doesn't really know how to deal with Jews as victors. They prefer us as victims. And there's almost a mathematical algorithm, which maybe one of the listeners could figure out, of how many Jews are killed or wounded for Israel to get a little wiggle room to defend itself. I remember during the Second Intifada when over 1,000 Israelis were killed in bus bombings and shootings. Sbarro pizzeria bombing, 20, I don't know how many, 21 killed or whatever, 17 killed, I remember, and 150 wounded. So for 2 days, Israel's allowed to go after terrorists, or 3 days, and then overreaction.
Right.
So I said, I think it literally took 6 million Jews dying in the Holocaust for the world to barely eke out a vote. Flushing Meadow, November 29th, 1947, 33-13 with 10 abstentions.
What was the vote again?
33-13 with 10 abstentions. Thankfully, the abstentions didn't count. They just took the vote of who voted for and against.
Who voted against? Do you know?
I don't remember the countries, to be honest, but I don't remember. That's a good question. I remember you can listen to the famous recording of them calling out the names of who voted.
The UN was in Flushing Meadow?
It was in Flushing. The General Assembly building wasn't built yet. It was in Flushing Meadow in Queens, if I'm not mistaken. But to vote to partition Palestine.
Partition.
I mean, create, even though, not to go into the history of the fact that the Treaty of San Remo in 1920 gave all of what is Israel and all of what is Jordan to Israel.
Right.
And that same treaty is what created every other state in the Middle East, and the British did not keep to their side of the bargain, but that's this whole separate discussion on the history of the peace process and the creation of the state of Israel. But, had the Arabs accepted the vote, along with Israel would have been born an Arab state. Whether it would have been called Palestine or not, I don't know, because that name wasn't used by Arabs really until the 1960s when the PLO was founded. But what
they call them beforehand, before 1960?
The only people who call themselves Palestinians were the Jews living here.
Right.
The Jews called themselves Palestinian Jews. Right. And then when they heard David Ben-Gurion on May 14th, 1948, he announced what the name of the country is going to be.
Yeah.
No one was sure it was going to be. Maybe it's going to be Herzl land.
Right.
Maybe it's going to be Zion land or Zion, But so the Jews stopped calling themselves, like El Al's original name was Palestine Airways, and the Jerusalem Post was the Palestine Post. Right. And the founding of the PLO is a whole separate discussion.
All the Palestinian coins back over the century, they're all Jewish coins.
Well, that's not to get into the origin. The changing of the name to Palestina was an attempt by the Romans to eradicate the Jewish connection to the land of Israel after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century. They decided to destroy us, both components of our identity, our spiritual identity and our national identity. So they went after Torah, and they went after our country. Renaming everything in the country, every city a non-Jewish name, like renaming Shechem Naples, but Palestinians don't have a P sound, so they call it Nablus, and things like that. Or Banyas is Banyas.
How can Palestinians call themselves Palestinians when they don't have a P sound?
It's what they call it, Palestine. But they don't. It's funny. All the passwords in the War of Independence had a peh, precisely for that reason.
Oh, the what? Say this
all the passwords, because then if you're gonna ask passwords, if you're in a war, you have passwords. You want to pick a sound, ideally that the enemy can't say,
right?
Because they can't fake it. Even if they learn the word, they won't be able to pronounce it properly. So
that's so interesting.
So that's an interesting side point. But to go back to what we were talking about, because we got on a tangent, it took 6 million Jews dying for the world barely to vote to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. It wasn't to take the land away from the Arabs. That's a whole nother discussion. But to partition it, there's going to be 22 Arab states of the Arab League.
Right.
Now we're going to have a 23rd if a Palestinian state is ever created. But to partition it, and I always say, fast forward 80 plus years later, and the residual guilt for the Holocaust has worn off, and now people are fed up with feeling guilty. And I think on the deepest level, and it might sound cynical, one of the reasons why we always merge the Nazi, even the images, like I saw a cartoon of an Israeli soldier, and it's amazing how they merge the Jewish images with the Nazi images. I could even send you this picture. It's a soldier wearing a talit. That's already a Jewish symbol.
Right.
And he's like bowing down praying, and on the talit is a Jewish star. And so he's obviously, and he's got a gun, and out of the gun is coming smoke because it's like the feet of a dead Palestinian,
right.
And the smoke's turning into a swastika, like the 6 lines of a Magen David have morphed into a swastika. So what's really dangerous about that? What's dangerous about that, number one, is the merging of Jewish imagery with Israeli imagery, because the Israeli thing is just a veneer. Like Israel bashing is just the last thin excuse that anti-Semitism is hiding behind when it's hid behind so many other ridiculous accusations throughout history. So that's number one that's kind of scary. And number two is the morphing of the Jewish symbolism with Nazism, because what's on a very deep psychological level, if we only gave you a state because of what the Nazis did to you, and if we turn you into the Nazis, we don't have to feel guilty about it because you know better than they are. So we don't have to feel guilty about what happened then, what we did to you or didn't do to you or didn't help you or stood by and let happen. And now we can bash you again because you're just as bad.
And the whole world feels great about that.
And I mean, again, I don't like to generalize because there's plenty of people in the world who like Israel and the Jewish state. But for those people who are looking but you combine that with the very toxic intersectionality thing that's going on in the world of all minorities, be they, you have black here, you have this there, you have Palestinians, all people of color, they kind of all their struggles have to merge together, and that's why Black Lives Matter is very hardcore. I would say anti-Israel and also anti-Semitic, because it's the intersectionality. So it's like a double whammy. So it's just a very scary thing that's happening now, and it's extremely insulting. It's super insulting when Jews are accused of being Nazis or Nazi-like or committing genocide, is the word you always hear. Mahmoud Abbas, who got, by the way, his PhD in Patricia Lumumba University in Moscow, in the school that was next to the one I went to. He's much older than I am. He got a PhD writing a thesis denying the Holocaust.
What? That's really how he got his PhD.
Now, Mahmoud Abbas, in the 17th year of his 4-year term, because the last time the Palestinian Authority elections was 17 years ago. Exactly. And we're supposed to be negotiating with this guy.
Yeah.
Scary stuff.
So what is it about Judaism that attracts all of this hate?
Oh, nothing like a nice, light, small question. The way I say it, and I have a whole presentation on it, and I write about it, and it's in this book. I have several chapters on it.
He's pointing to Destiny, the book that he's pointing to.
The mission of the Jewish people historically and why we're hated, I believe, are very much interconnected. And I always say, when we're looking at anti-Semitism, do the short version of the explanation. We've been accused of a lot of things in this world. We killed Jesus. We kidnapped Christian babies, used their blood to bake matzah. We poison wells. We're in league with the devil. We control the world's economy, the entertainment industry. We control seismic activity and solar flares. We have space lasers. We trigger tsunamis in Southeast Asia to drown Indonesia with tidal waves, release sharks into the Red Sea to destroy Egyptian tourism, send vultures to spy on Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and we steal the clouds from Iran.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? First of all, I say, if people even believe 10% of what they say about us, no one would mess with us.
No.
Would you mess with people who control the entertainment industry, the governments of the world, the world's economy, the animal kingdom, and the weather?
Yeah.
I wouldn't touch these people. You know? It's like if I have Vinny in my 6th grade class and his father runs the local mafia.
Yeah, no one's gonna mess with you.
I'm not going to pick on him.
No.
So clearly they don't believe it. The only people who believe it are, by the way, Asians who don't hate us. They there's a guy in Torah, Gabi Sassoon, who's from the famous Sassoon family. He grew up in Japan. He told me that the Japanese are big buyers of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is the world's most famous forgery, written in 1901 by the secret police of Tsar of Russia, called the Black 100s. And it's supposedly the minutes of a meeting where the heads of the Federation and the rabbis get together to plan the next 100 years of Jewish control of the world. I always jokingly say, how do you know it's a forgery? Because anyone who thinks 10 Jews in a room could agree on anything knows nothing about the Jewish people. But in places like Japan, it's a big selling book. And he says they don't buy it there because they hate Jews. They actually believe it's true, and they want to know how we're doing it so they can copy it. Yeah. But that would be the correct reaction.
Yeah.
So
it's funny. There's laws in the Torah that say you can't. It's not kosher to drink blood. You can't drink blood.
Yeah, of course not. But I'm saying,
and you can't go for politics.
But I'm saying people now. A lot of people believe these things.
Yeah, I know.
And unfortunately, a lot of it comes from Europe, but it has brought into the Middle East by people like the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj al-Min al-Husseini, and now you have Arab television today, in the modern world, showing movies about ritual murder of Jews, doing it with Arab actors and stuff.
Right.
They actually have this. They're showing this stuff. So it's spread around the world, and now it takes the form of modern ritual murder, where the Palestinian Authority claims Israeli soldiers deliberately kill Palestinians to harvest their organs to sell them on the international organ, market out there. But I'm saying all of those excuses aside, which millions of people may actually believe, the real explanation of anti-Semitism was that we have been dragging the world, kicking and screaming towards a vision of values based on one God and one absolute standard of morality, which is the great Jewish contribution to the world, besides guilt bagels, junk bonds, leverage buyouts, Einstein, Marx, Freud, 22% of all the Nobel Prizes since 1901. The biggest Jewish impact on the world is bringing the world the idea of one absolute infinite creator of the universe and a standard of morality that transcends any voting process, judgment, absolute ethical monotheism. So I say whatever the Jewish understanding of whatever excuse anti-Semitism hides behind, which people may believe, it's ultimately a revolt against the national historic mission of the Jewish people to finish that job and connect humanity to God, because our job is to be that God squad and to be the conduit to connect humanity to the creator of the universe and teach the world by example, not by converting. We don't convert people. It's very hard to convert to Judaism. Not by conquering. We don't have empires. The only Jewish empire in history, I always say, is Hollywood. Yeah. And it's not a source of Jewish values, because there's a lot of Jews who might mean well, but they're not well educated, and you can't represent the Jewish people till you know what the Jewish people represents. But that is really our job. And I think the person who said it the best is Rav Chaim of Volozhin, who was a great early 19th century rabbi. Sometimes the shortest quotes are the best. He said, when Jews don't make Kiddush, Gentiles make Havdalah.
What's that supposed to mean?
So Kiddush is the ceremony we make with wine.
Yes.
And when you go to the higher spiritual level, from the 6 workaday days of the week, you go to the higher level of Shabbat. Mm-hmm. We Jews believe time has energy, and you enter that higher, and you have a cup of wine. You make Kiddush, and you enter that higher spiritual level. Havdalah you make on Saturday night when the Shabbat goes out, and you go down to the lower mundane other 6 days of the week. And it's also made with a glass of wine. He's not saying literally we don't make Kiddush, they don't make Havdalah. He says when we don't do Kiddush Hashem, which is the real job of the Jewish people.
Sanctification.
When we don't live and act in a way that inspires other people, which is what it's all about. And by the way, in my opinion, most religious Jews do not get this point. They think that the purpose of being Jewish is to serve God, which is a figure of speech but not possible because he's infinite and we don't do anything for him. And Torah and mitzvot, they say, is to learn Torah and do mitzvot. Super important.
Yes.
There is no Jewish people without Torah and mitzvot, and that is the software that keeps us going. It's our guidance system, it's our fuel, but it's a means, not an ends. That, by the way, is a game changer. The purpose of being Jewish, individually and collectively, the purpose of a Jewish state, which is Israel, is to live and act in a way that inspires others. People are supposed to look at us and say, look at these Jews. Look at how they live. Look at how happy they are. Look at their families. Look at how they raise their children. Look at their marriages. Look at how they run businesses. Look at how they run their country. What's their secret? There's a really famous quote that everyone knows. Imitation is the highest form of flatter.
Yeah.
That's the shortest class you ever got on Christianity and Islam. Because literally, if we did not, despite suffering massive persecution, live in a communal structure that had social welfare infrastructure, higher rates of literacy, all the things that were lacking in the world at the time. Not that Jews are perfect and all non-Jews are terrible. I'm not saying that. But as a rule, we just had it better. We just had better idea about living. These other faiths would not have come out of us because no one imitates losers.
No.
The problem is they say basically, you guys are right, but we replaced you.
Right.
So as Maimonides says, the great medieval Jewish scholar who died in 1205, he said that Christianity and Islam are 2 steps forward because they weaned much of the world off of paganism, but it's a step back. I'm just putting my own words to Maimonides, because they think they replaced us, and now they persecute us for still sticking around and considering that we think ourselves still relevant. How dare you?
Right.
But it's an amazing story, and I think that's a game changer for the world to realize, which is why, as George Gilder wrote in his book, The Israel Test, which is a great book, he said the central issue that defines the world today is what you think about Israel.
Wow.
He says because those people, it's between those people who just think they have it all coming to them and entitlement and leveling everything, versus the people who recognize the excellence of what Israel stands for and the Jewish people in history is something that we want to have a relationship with and support, because it represents not Jewish superiority or Jewish domination. That's never been our goal in the world, but it is a functional vision of a world on a spiritual and physical and communal and governmental level, which the world doesn't know how to do, because you look how the world vacillates back and forth between these incredible extremes of conservatism and liberalism and particularism, universalism, and because without that, the stability of an absolute standard, we're lost. And that really is, all other things aside, that's really what it's about. And that's why Dennis Prager and Joseph Telushkin in their excellent book, Why the Jews, they talk about how the Jew is the canary in the coal mine. Miners used to bring their little canaries into the mines because before you had modern gas detection equipment, you had this gas that could kill you before you even knew it was there. Right. When an evil comes into the world, and you can test this like gravity. If Jews are around, it'll come after Jews first. And why should it concern non-Jews? Because then it'll just spread to everyone else. It starts with us because we're like the most sensitive to it, like we're the tissue in the body that's most susceptible to the cancer. But then it's going to spread to everyone else. So if you don't stand up and stop, it's like Nemo, or that famous quote, when they came for the labor unionists, I didn't complain because I wasn't, when they talk about the Nazis, I wasn't a labor unionist. When they came for the Jews, I didn't complain because I wasn't a Jew. And he goes, when they came for me, there was no one left to protest. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's such a fundamental issue. And I always say you can pretty much tell where a human being is holding and where a country is holding by how they treat a Jewish person or the Jewish state. Right. Countries that tend to support Israel tend to be stable, liberal democracies. Countries that come after Israel, it's not an accident that Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, these are not paradigms of prosperous, successful countries. These are some of the worst countries with the worst human rights records, because evil will come after the Jews first. And the scary part is, because Heschel, the great, conservative Jewish rabbi leader, who says he had a lot of great wisdom, by the way. He said the Jew is a messenger who's largely forgotten the message. Most Jews are for every ism but Judaism. I know. They're giving their lives and their resources to everything but Judaism. But the real hater of the message recognizes that it's within every Jew this unique soul, and he's going to come after you even if you don't identify as a Jew, even if you get baptized and try and hide. He's going to come after you because he knows that you get baptized 100 times, you get very wet, but you're still Jewish. Yeah. And you still represent him a threat because you're like a super spreader. Right. You're a super spreader for ideology that he hates. And that is a game-changing point, I think even most of the religious world, unfortunately, doesn't get.
So you think the world doesn't want morality?
No, I think a lot of the world does want morality. Right. But a lot of the world wants. Hitler said it openly. I know. Hitler was so honest about it. Forget all the quotes that are attributed to him. I always say that the Hitler Youth song, which is hiding in plain sight, is the last 7 words of that song. It's right there. It goes, "We are the joyous Hitler Youth. We don't need any Christian virtue. Our leader is our savior," meaning Hitler. "The Pope and Rabbi shall be gone. The Judeo-Christian ethics got to be out the window. And then we want to be pagans once again." Wow. Hitler says, you are crushed by this burden of having it he called it the human concept, that versus the natural concept. Nature is brutal, but nature is balanced. If you know what Hitler really was into, he loved Teutonic, like Odin, Vili, Thor, Wagner's The Ride of the Valkyries, which is all this Teutonic, incredibly violent Nordic stuff. Yeah. What was the Nordic idea of heaven? Valhalla. What do you do in Valhalla? You drink, you fight, and you do other stuff we're not going to mention. Yeah. But it's like a completely bodily, it's all about, the Viking ultimate thing was to die in battle. Right. That was their thing. And he loved the Roman Empire pre-paganism. Pre-Christianity. He loved it when it was pagan. And he said the world has been crushed by an artificial standard that it's foisted on the world by the Jews one way or another through liberalism, not the misuse of the word today, but through the real, like John Locke, because the real foundation of liberal democracy is Judeo-Christian ethics, which is really Jewish ethics. He said these ideas of responsibility and the freedoms you have to take. Freedom is a tough responsibility. We're going back to the topic we talked about. The Talmud says a slave likes to be a slave, not to be beaten, but it's really nice to not have to make decisions. I always tell people the best vacation I had for years I was in the Israeli army. I used to do reserve duty for a month a year, which could be dangerous. We used to drive. We used to escort convoys into Gaza. This is how long ago it was. But I had 3 decisions to make a day. Eat, don't eat, sleep, don't sleep, and go out on patrol. Right. Go home. I got to deal with the wife, the kids, the car, the job, the deadline, the work. That's okay. They're saying this is tough. The average person doesn't have too much ambition to take too much responsibility. So I'll take it for you. But if we have these Jews around, they're going to be saying the other way. So we gotta get rid of them.
Wow.
Wow. That's so interesting and a little bit scary. My question is, what should we learn now from our past in order to protect or build our future?
Well, first of all, we got to learn from our past. Number one, we should never make the mistake of thinking, like right now with anti-Semitism rearing its ugly head, we should never think that, like a country like America, which has a very unique relationship with the Jewish people and Jewish values, they even have God on their money. And I'm not saying that there's going to be a Holocaust in America, but we should never think that it couldn't happen there. You couldn't have some variation of a very uncomfortable situation arising of open violence and Jews being forced to leave or just becoming so uncomfortable. That's like a huge lesson. But I think the most important thing we need to learn from our history is what our mission is in this world. I'm a huge Zionist, but Zionism really just wanted to be, like it says in the words of Hatikva, Liotam Chofshi Be'artzeinu, just to be like everyone else. Yeah. Now, I am not a prophet. If I was, I'd be working in Wall Street and I wouldn't be speaking. But there's one prediction I'm happy to make because it's so obvious that we will never be allowed individually as people, whether we live in diaspora or the Jewish state, to be like everyone else.
We're not supposed to be like everybody else.
Because we're not supposed to be. We are the nation that dwells alone. That was the famous line of the famous non-Jewish prophet Bilam in the book of Numbers, who's hired to curse us. Out of his mouth comes one of the greatest truisms about being Jewish, which explains, by the way, the crazy double standard. Why has the UN passed more resolutions condemning Israel than every other country in the world combined?
That's crazy.
Remember Hebrew National? That
the whole
kosher,
standard.
but not. It's funny. It is kosher, but a lot of people won't eat it because it's not kosher enough.
Right.
But remember that used to have that commercial with Uncle Sam, who was actually a World War I recruitment poster. He's standing under. This is a commercial from like 40 years ago plus. He's standing under this really scary-looking sky, and it's like United States Department of Agriculture allows you to add this many additives and food colorings and chemicals to your hot dogs. And he's like, and he looks up at the scary sky, and he's like. And it's like United States Department of Agriculture allows you to add this much fat and bone and skin to your hot dogs. And he's like, he looks up at the sky and he's like, and the announcer says, Hebrew National, we have to answer to a higher authority.
Yeah.
So I'm saying take out Hebrew National and put in Hebrew Nation and you get one of the greatest truisms of Jewish history that we have to remember always, that being Jewish is never going to be comfortable, but it's always going to be meaningful. And our role in history, individually and collectively, is too central to allow us, like the little superhero. That's my whole book was about that. That if you take the hero's journey of any great story, and the story beats, it's always the same thing. There's a little, the world goes into darkness. There's a big bad power up there. A little superhero appears. Doesn't even know he's the hero. Doesn't even want the job. But he can't escape it. Because his role is too critical. And he gets thrown into a series of confrontations with the big bad guy that he should have lost so many times over. And sometimes he barely makes it out alive. But all these strengths come out of it. And in the end, there's a final showdown. And it doesn't make a difference whether it's Harry Potter or Luke Skywalker or whoever you want to look at, Neo in The Matrix, or against Voldemort or Saruman or Darth Vader. It's always the same beats. There's always a final showdown, and evil is destroyed, and good triumphs, and the balance is returned. And the reason why that is so ingrained in the collective consciousness of humanity in the entertainment business is precisely because that is the real plot of human history. And the real lesson we have to learn as Jews is we run off to these movies because we think our life is so mundane, and I wanted something. This guy has an exciting life, Harry Potter. Now, we are collectively the protagonists in this story. And it's happening out, but the problem is it's not one guy in a couple of books or in a couple of hours. It's one nation that comes from one family over several thousand years in the ultimate story. And despite our teeny tiny size, which explains the world shouldn't even notice us. Why are we so disproportional? Why does the world go so nuts on us? Why, as Charles Krauthammer, the late great Charles Krauthammer said, Jews is news.
Yeah.
And since good news is no news, only bad news makes news. We're never going to pick on the Jews, but this is exactly the point. So the big lessons we have to learn as Jews is you may try and hide who you are, but history and your neighbor is going to eventually remind you of it.
Yes.
And you can try and opt out of it, which is the biggest tragedy for a Jew to opt out of Judaism, because first of all, when they really want to come after you, they find you anyway. But you break the chain and you opt out of being the protagonist, the superhero in the story. And like I said, it's not comfortable being Luke Skywalker, being Neo, being Darth, being Harry Potter is not comfortable. These guys have a lot of challenges, but look how great they are in the end. Look the difference they make in the world. This is the Jewish people. Look how, for our teeny tiny size, how we have so transformed humanity in so many ways. In the words of what's his name? Who wrote The Gift of the Jews?
Joseph Lieberman. No,
a non-Jewish writer. Gift of the Jews.
Tolstoy.
Sorry.
No.
Cahill, Thomas Cahill. He said, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it's such a beautiful quote. He said, the whole human race basically wakes up and looks at the world through Jewish software. That so much of what we process in reality in the world is coming through what the Jewish people have laid into the collective consciousness of humanity. That it's like background operating program of values and how we look at the world. That is, whether through the offshoot religions that have come from Judaism or through what we call modern liberal democracy, which is overwhelmingly, the name might come from Greece, but overwhelmingly the values of the founding fathers. And you look at the early modern period. I have a whole presentation on how much these people were shaped by biblical values. Transforms the world. And he says, we wake up in the morning and we're basically all Jewish. It's one of the most beautiful quotes. I didn't like the books. That book kept me from getting my WorldPerfect for 2 years published because Simon & Schuster and Random House said, Cahill came out with the same book. I said, no, he didn't. We have nothing in common with my book, but it said Gift of the Jews and WorldPerfect Jewish Impact on Civilization. And I'm not a big fan of the book as a whole, but there's a couple of paragraphs in that book that are some of the most beautiful things ever said about the Jewish people and our impact on the world. And that is the big lesson, to recognize who we are, what our mission is, that the world's not going to leave us alone, but rather than go, it really stinks to be a Jew, I got to suffer through this like Tevye the milkman, couldn't you choose someone else? To recognize that, like we say every morning, Ashreinu Matov Halkeinu, happy are we, how good is our lot, we should thank God that we were born Jewish, and we have the ability individually and collectively to continue to shape and guide a world that is so lacking in role models and direction, and we have the winning program, because it's designed by an infinite intelligence. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We don't have to reinvent anything. It's out there. We just need Jews for Judaism. But that requires two things. It requires Jewish unity, and it requires Jewish education, and being, of course, proactive. Because you can't represent the Jewish people till you know what the Jewish people represents.
Correct.
And I'm a big believer that ignorance is a bigger threat to us than anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So if we just had Jews with basic Jewish wisdom and stop focusing on what we're tearing each other apart. It's crazy stuff. There's millions of people who hate us, and we're fighting. And we've been doing this throughout history. Right outside the window, you have the remains of the Temple Mount.
Yes.
As the Romans are surrounding Jerusalem, trying to get in to slaughter us, the Jews inside the city are fighting a civil war. And God's sitting up there saying, you want to kill each other? I can't stand to watch. I'm going to send Gentiles to do it for you. So if we just start focusing on what unites us and picking the things that we can agree on, because there's things we can all agree on as Jews, and not what divides us, and becoming educated and focusing the incredible energy and drive and creativity we have as a people on doing what we're supposed to do, which is be humanity's role models, which is the thing the world needs more than anything else to restore that balance. The world would not only stop. There might be a little bit of a pushback initially, because some people get really scared, like when you back the animal into the corner on the animal shows. When's the baboon most dangerous? When the lion's about to kill it.
Yeah.
It's going to give its last burst of energy. That's when the anti-Semitism is most explosive. But once we get past the hump, the world's going to line up behind us and say, show us how to do it. You got the right stuff.
How do we create that reality?
So again, that it requires, the problem is, another thing I say about the Jewish world is I don't feel we have the leadership that's doing that.
Right.
And when I say the leadership, I'm not talking about the political leadership in Israel. I don't even think we have and I might get in trouble for saying this, the rabbinic leadership, because
do we have rabbinic leadership?
The word gadol, people use the word gadol, and I always tell people when they say, the Gedolim say, I always say to them, first of all, those are your Gedolim. Every group of Jews has its own Gedolim.
Right.
Ashkenazi Gedolim are different than Sephardi Gedolim. Religious nationalist Gedolim are different from, Lithuanian Yeshivish Gedolim. But in my opinion, what we have today a lot of, and I'm not disparaging any great rabbi, is people who are Talmidei Chachamim, people who know, they know, and there's no difference between, halacha covers everything, but they know halacha. They can be
Jewish
poskim.
law.
They know Jewish law. They be poskim. But a real gadol, in my opinion, is someone who leads, doesn't follow, who says what needs to be said, even if he knows it's going to get a really cold reception. And I don't see too many rabbis today. I hold Rabbi Noach Weinberg, in whose house we're sitting.
Yes.
Was a much bigger gadol than many people who call gadolim. Not that he was a great rabbi and a great mind, but because he saw at a time when intermarriage was taking Jews out and really speeding up, that you could actually bring Jews back. And he's really one of the driving forces behind the whole Baal Tshuva movement. He always was willing to do things that he caught a heck of a lot of flack for. And in the hindsight, everyone saw he was right, because he was dedicated to truth and reality, and the Jewish motto should always be truth regardless of consequences. Mm-hmm. We say Hashem Elokechem Emes. Lord our God is truth. God and truth is the same thing. The definition of absolute truth and reality is God. That is the only real reality there is. And to the extent that a person has hashkafa, which is our worldview, which is another thing, I'm probably getting in trouble for saying this, but I don't believe that most people who are born religious actually have a clearly thought out hashkafa. They know they're supposed to be learning Torah and doing mitzvot. They know they're supposed, I got to keep Shabbat, I got to keep kosher, I'm supposed to be learning, But if you actually push them, okay, now what? What's the purpose of all of this? Oh, to serve God. Get to heaven. No, it's not about that. Getting to heaven's a nice place to get to. But we got a mission in this world, and I don't believe the difference between like all of us sitting around this table who all chose to be religious, who came from backgrounds that were, is we at a mature age. I didn't want to. My mother told me years ago, I know you're religious when you stop eating shrimp, because I love shrimp. And I used to think people who kept Shabbat were out of their flaming minds.
So did I.
The craziest people. Yeah. I now say, Shabbat is so amazing. I say, even if I didn't believe in God, I would keep Shabbat.
Yeah.
But just have a day without my smartphone.
I know.
It's the best day ever. I get depressed when Shabbat goes out. It's the only day I can rejuvenate, all puns intended. But I got the train of thought pulled out without me on it. What were we talking about before that? I went on an idea, and I forgot what we were talking about there. But
I don't remember either.
No, I said hashkafa. Yeah,
hashkafa. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, religious people that they knew what they were doing.
I honestly think that we need to, which is why I noticed when we started doing these outreach programs for secular Jews, more and more religious Jews started coming to them.
Well, they're passive religious Jews. Yeah.
Because they said we never got this stuff.
I know.
And it's interesting. If you push a religious Jew to tell you why are you doing what you're doing? Because Rabbi Weinberg, one of his he had these great lines. He said, if you were born in Red China, you'd be waving Mao Zedong's red book.
Right.
If you were born in Italy, you'd be good Italian Catholic, and you'd have your rosary beads and go to church on Sunday. And if you were born in Mea Shearim, the Bible Belt, North Jerusalem, you'd have your black hat and your long black coat and your tzitzit and your peyot, and you'd be keeping Shabbat and keeping kosher. He says every single group of people, every society, every tribe, culture, and country socializes people to believe, think, and act in a certain way. And unless you've taken the time to actually work out why you're doing what you're doing, you're basically operating on autopilot. And I think that a huge percentage of the Jewish world is just operating on autopilot. Yeah. And I find in my discussions with them, when I push them on things that require thought, the fallback thing is, what do the Gedolim say? I said, what do you say? You have a brain. If you had, in my mind, every rabbi has a rabbi. I got a rabbi I ask. I don't know everything. I know there's a lot of things I don't know in this world, and I know when to ask questions, but I also know when, this is a book. There's a book. I don't have to ask a rabbi, is this a book or not?
Right.
There's certain basic points that if you had clear hashkafa, in my mind, you'd have a very clear idea of what you should or shouldn't do in certain circumstances and where the Jewish people should be going. And it would affect the Jewish people, because if you think your job is to keep super kosher, no matter what, then maybe I'll embarrass this person because I'm not going to eat in their house. Or they'll bring me some food and I'm not going to eat that, But I don't realize that my job is to do Kiddush Hashem.
Yes.
And not to turn this person off, God forbid. And even if I can't eat their food because I have a guest for Shabbat and they bring me something that's not kosher, I'm going to say thank you so much, and I'm going to put that's so sweet of you, and I'm going to put aside and not serve it, but I'm not going to go, oh God, how'd you bring that? So
one of my rabbis said they hosted some people for Pesach, the first Seder, and they brought a cake from the local non-kosher grocery store because they had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you're going to make the person feel bad about it?
Yeah.
No, you got to recognize that embarrassing a person is like killing them.
It is.
And if you recognize that you have to be, this is one of the big things that's lacking. And again, I'm not meaning to rip the religious world, but most of the stringencies people take upon themselves are between Ben Adam the Makom, between us and our Creator, like how kosher we'll keep.
Right.
How stringently I'll keep Shabbat. These are stringencies, and stringencies are fine if you need them to grow spiritually, but they should be weighed against how it impacts your fellow human being. Like the way I always say it, that's not my original line, is you have to be twice as careful what comes out of your mouth as what you put in your mouth.
Right.
And all the criticism that's being said by people like Jeremiah to the Jews 2,500 years ago, because if it's in the Hebrew Bible, it's in there because A, it's written by a prophet, and B, it has a message that is relevant throughout history. He's speaking to them 2,500 years ago about the fetish focus they have on the temple. They're all screaming, Heichel Hashem, Heichel Hashem. No one can touch us because we have the temple. It's like a force field.
Right.
And Jeremiah is saying, what are you talking about? He's saying, you don't take care of the widows, the orphans, the downtrodden, the oppressed. That house ain't going to protect you. And they didn't listen. They listened to the false prophets, the kings, and the consequence was the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Jewish people. So it's being a balanced Jew. And in the Jewish world, you have the Jewish world. If the issue that separates the secular and religious Jewish worlds is that the secular Jewish world is to a large extent disconnected from spirituality and God and the commandments between kashrut, Shabbat, things like that. But they're hyper focused on the social justice aspects of Judaism.
Tikkun
Olam, which has become
Torah.
The last Pew Research study they did years ago. Like they said, 52% of Jews, when they said the word Jew to a Jew, they said commitment to social justice. Over half the Jews, that's the first word out of their mouth, whereas religious observance came in at 17%. Meanwhile, if you speak to religious Jews, they'll talk about kashrut, Shabbat, learning Torah, and you have to be balanced. We don't have balanced Jews in this world. You need a role model of a Jew who knows how to do Kiddush Hashem. And when I walk around with my yid lid on, I'm always consciously aware. Especially I'm in America, everything I do, I'm a Jew. I'm the God Squad. I'm representing the Jewish people to the world. And little things I do, anything, if I'm rude, if I cut someone off, anything I do, I go out of my way. I'm usually a pretty polite human being anyway, but I got to be super careful because I'm going to pay for this if I do it wrong.
Because you have New York in you.
Yeah. I won't honk. I'm sitting there, especially when I go to Israel to New York, where they honk also. I'm not going to honk. I'm not going to honk. But the real lesson, I think, for us is those Jews who are better educated or connected have a greater level of responsibility. That's a very clear idea. That Jews who are raised with little or no background do not have the same status and the same level. It's a very fundamental idea in Judaism. According to your level of knowledge and your level of responsibility is the impact of the mistakes or the decisions you make and the level of accountability you are held to. The President of the United States makes a mistake, it could be huge. A taxi driver makes a mistake on the street, he goes down the wrong street, probably not going to be huge. Mm-hmm. And just like we don't hold the 3-year-old to the same level of accountability as a 20-year-old, those of us who claim to represent God are going to be held to a higher level. We have the real responsibility. So rather than looking at a secular Jew and going and judging them and, I'm going to heaven, but he's in trouble. No, God's going to hold me accountable for me not being proactively involved with him.
I always say that I don't want to go to heaven one day and my neighbor's going to be there with a baseball bat saying, why don't you teach me about Torah? Why don't you teach me about God while you're alive? You were teaching it. I'm their next door neighbor. Why didn't you do anything about it?
And I always say the first thing is, what's the first part of a Hippocratic oath? First, do no harm.
Yeah.
If you're too scared to go, because a lot of religious Jews are afraid to deal with secular Jews, they might ask me questions I can't answer, and they'll shake up my faith, and oh my God. But I said, first, do no harm. Don't do anything that's going to turn someone off, which is why whenever I catch anyone in downtown Jerusalem, where I live now, yelling Shabbos at a car,
I can't stand that.
I stop them immediately and I tell them, I said, you know what? No one ever thought better about the Yiddishkeit, I say, because they're usually this Hasidic guys.
Yeah.
Yiddishkeit or the Rabbeinu Shalom, because they were yelled at. I said, I got a great idea. If you have so much energy and free time, why don't you set up a little table over here with grape juice, not wine, because they're driving, and why don't you offer them cake? And when they come to the stop sign.
Yeah.
And I could promise you, you'll probably get a lot more mileage out of that. You might actually get someone to stop driving in their car instead of looking at you and hating you and thinking, like, you're not paying your taxes, you're not working, you're not serving in the army, and they're yelling at me.
Yeah.
Right.
This is terrible stuff.
Yeah.
But it comes from a lack of realism. I'm being so holy, that's how I'm going to make them holy. Yeah. And that never works.
No.
Never works.
Has anyone done it?
What?
Set up their grape juice stand?
I don't know. I've said it to people, but I have stories about. I heard a great story of a big Kiruv rabbi who told that in the Bukharan quarter, into which very religious neighborhood, Sephardi, into it moved this Moroccan mafia guy and his family. And all the kids because a lot of the religious kids can be very nasty. They yell stuff at you.
Yeah.
They yell like that. They'll yell stuff at the kids and stay, like, goyim,
Yeah.
and call them like non-Jews and stuff. So he said, my father pulled us aside and said, this guy is one of the biggest mafia families in Israel. He said, don't you dare say anything to those kids. He was afraid this was going to happen. And what did the father start doing? That's first do no harm. Then the father started every Friday leaving a bottle of wine and 2 chalot. This guy was a completely secular Moroccan mafia guy. A bottle of wine and 2 chalot on the guy's doorstep every Erev Shabbat. And he did it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And he tells a story. It's a beautiful story. And he said, eventually the guy came to him and said, would you please take me to the Beit Knesset with you? Take me to synagogue with you. And he said, the guy today, Chazer B'tshuva, religious family. No religious, no more organized crime. It doesn't take a lot. It just takes first, be a good role model. Show this person that I don't think you're a goy. You're a Jew. I love you. I may not agree with you. I always say about any parent gets this. You don't always like your kids, but you always love them, especially when they're teenagers. Yeah. You might annoy me, but I'm responsible for you. And just I can't, if I think I'm going to hide my little neighborhood with signs warning you not to come in, and I'm going to be okay, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
I'm in big trouble. Reb Noach, that was one of his favorite pieces of scary Talmud he used to love quoting about when they're about to destroy the temple, and God says to the angels, go put marks on the heads of the righteous because I want to spare them. And the accusing angel, who's the prosecuting attorney guy, says, but these were the guys who had the responsibility to tell everyone else to get their act together so that the temple wouldn't be destroyed in the first place. And God says, I'm paraphrasing, I'm God, I know they wouldn't have listened. And the accusing angel says, but they didn't try. And God says, go put marks on the head. We're going to kill them first. Oof. Which is why we should never. It's a scary way of putting it, but it's responsibility is a heavy thing. If you know, you got to be responsible. It's not just enough to live in your community and keep uber kosher and keep super Shabbat while the ship goes down. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lezeh. Every Jew is responsible for every other Jew. And far more Jews are disappearing statistically since the Holocaust than Hitler killed in the Holocaust.
Oh, for sure.
It's there,
71% of
post-Holocaust, there were 11 million Jews in the world. Now there's maybe 14 million. The world's population has gone up easily 350%. Of the Jewish population, it just doubled, which would be low. It would be 22 million Jews.
Right.
Where did they go? Combination of horrendously low birth rates combined with assimilation and intermarriage are decimating the Jewish people. Today, the intermarriage rate is 70% plus.
Yep.
That is scary.
That's scary stuff.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work to grab the guy who's in love with, I always see in these intermarriage things, I always saying, but she's such a nice girl. Of course she's a nice girl.
They're all nice.
No one's marrying because she's ugly and mean. It's not a matter of being nice or not. It's a matter of, and to guilt someone when you have no Jewish identity, but you can't give Hitler a posthumous victory. Why? If being Jewish isn't important, why should I make any decisions based on that? I'm just looking for a good person to marry. We have to start with our children at a young age, showing them that it is something that is beautiful and meaningful, and we have a lot to offer the world. And when you give people that sense of meaning and pride, then they will obviously make the right decision and decide that perpetuating the Jewish people is like a really important thing to do, because the world needs Jews for Judaism. We're great role models for the human race.
Amazing.
Rabbi, where can our listeners find out more about you, or hear more of your ideas, and maybe talk about your books, each one?
So I have a website. It's kenspiro.com, Kenspiro. All the content, I'm a terrible businessman because most of my content is online for free to listen, read, and watch. And I also wrote a bunch of books that are also, the links to the publishers are there too. Mm-hmm. I've stopped for the last few months, but I've been doing a podcast called Remember What's Next.
Okay,
it's
great.
about current events.
We'll post that all in the description.
So and by all means, the people are welcome to contact me also if they have questions.
And you're also a tour guide here in Jerusalem.
I'm a tour guide here in Israel, absolutely.
Very popular tour guide. Highly recommend him. He's great.
Incredible tour guide.
Amazing.
My mother also highly recommends
Unbelievable, actually. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's been such a privilege.
Yeah, you're just amazing. We have so much more to talk to you about, politics and the world today. But
what will Arnold Schwarzenegger say? I'll be back.
I'll be back. You'll be back. No, we're going to have you back.
But before you leave, one more question, just for our viewers. Is there a message you'd like to get out there? Maybe a key to life, a key to clarity that you could that you'd like to share to our listeners?
A key to clarity. Well, first of all, the number one thing that I say, because I wear the rabbi and the historian hat, which is rare because Jewish history is the great black hole of Jewish education, even very well-educated Jews who study Talmud and yeshiva, all that. It's shocking how little history they know. So I'm a big believer that the beauty of Jewish history is, first of all, George Santayana's famous line: "If you don't learn from the past, you're going to repeat the mistakes." But it's also that it's the best way to learn hashkafa. History, Lord Bolingbroke had a great line. He said, "History is philosophy with examples." 100 years ago, a communist and a capitalist, because communism believed that human nature combined with economic trends would lead the entire world to a worker's paradise, in theory. But in practice, we see 100 years later that communism is proven to be the single most destructive idea in all of human history that's caused more death and suffering than any other idea in human history. So the history is the great way and we should. My great piece of wisdom, besides throwing out a nice slogan, is we need to start going back, learning our history, which begins in the Bible, and pulling out the lessons, which are the basic operating hashkafic software that we have to give us the direction, so that we don't have to repeat the same mistakes. We've been there, we've done that. Why are we doing it again? This is what works. Let's keep doing it. A beautiful quote that I would end on is Israel Meir Lau, who was one of the youngest survivors of Buchenwald at age 9. Who was former chief rabbi of Israel, now chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, a wonderful human being, mid-80s now, with incredible stories. How he survived the Holocaust is one of the great stories. He had a great line. He said, "A nation that doesn't value its past has no right to dream about its future." Mm-hmm. And that holds true, by the way, for a lot of us going on America today, of refocusing. And forget 1776 and freedom, and we're going to have the 1619 project and the original sin of slavery. Let's undermine our whole, same thing. You don't value where you're coming from. You have no right to dream about your future. And the wisdom that I would say is a nation that doesn't learn from its past is going to have a very tough time getting there. And I think that quote holds true for us more than almost anyone else, and probably more than anyone else.
Wow, that is incredible. What a privilege to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you again. Thank you for joining us on the Living in Clarity podcast.
See you next time. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Living in Clarity podcast.
If you enjoy what you just heard, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment with any suggestions for future episodes.
We'll see you next time.